And long before I met Noah, he came and took a river restoration class that was offered through the Environmental Professionals Program of Portland State. And so that's where I met Noah. And he has since invited me to come. But long before that, Joyce reminded me that we worked together all those years ago in Seaside during the riots. And she remembers that vividly, so do I. But yeah, so it's fun to always get reminders of those days and how long, I guess, we date ourselves, like, how long ago all of that was, because all the little Y2K bugs that happened since then are now 25 years old. So yeah, so, and I teach them now and all sorts of varying things, like the lectures I give at Portland State, or with the paramedic teaching program, things like that. They have no memory of any of that, which is just so funny. A great big person with a beard that, that was before their lifetime. I mean, it just shows you how long ago that was, and what's happening in terms of the shift that we kind of all need to get on board with. And hopefully this talk is related to that. I know there's been a kind of a hotbed of things on social media. There always is, but this is about not accusations. Like one of the things my grandmother always said is, when you go like this, meaning I know the camera can't see me, the Zoom world, but I'm waving my index finger at people. Remember, there's at least 3 fingers pointing back at you, okay? So this is not about accusations. The past is the past. Like, we can't change that. It's on the books. It's done. We can learn about it. We can grow, and we can try and embrace the fierce urgency of now, which is the present, the gift that is the present. And with that, we can shape a very different future. Like, we do not have to keep with that same old past. So that's what this is about, to take as much of it as you wish, or leave it. But what is also absolutely not about is not blaming anybody for the mama or the daddy, or the grandmama or the granddaddy, or raised by 2 mamas, or raised by adopted grandma, or whatever situation is going on. We are all born into this mess. We do not have a choice in that. It's the rest that we have a choice of. So that's kind of what, for me, what this talk is about. And I think people instantly, get triggered and get offended without even having listened. Just listen what it's about. It's not about accusing people. And I had a long talk this morning with a lady. She works for the Western Wildlife Alliance, and completely different from rivers. We were talking about wolves. And that's exactly what we were getting at. It's like, we've got to stop this hollering and screaming and screeching at each other. Like, we've got to try and understand and just talk, and get back to who we are as Oregonians, and just work it out. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be something that's much more positive than what we got going on right now. So with that, I will go through my talk, and I purposely, I didn't have anything particular to the Mechanicum, so I'm sorry, but I did pick a different rural community, which I've done some work with, particularly in the comics, and also I've given them an EJ talk, which is the community of Hood River. And so I'll show you some of those things for Hood River, and kind of, again, how it all applies, because a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about is systemic. And when it's systemic, like, you change a few variables, but otherwise it's the same. The details are all the same. It's an oft repeating story. And one of the things, when Noah came to the class, we go to the Kellogg Dam, which you'll see in the talk. It's in Milwaukee, Oregon. To be in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, it's the same. It's going to be those same systemic issues everywhere you go. That's why the story is so easy to tell. And while I don't have your specifics, I think you'll see a lot of the same common themes in your community, as we'll see throughout Oregon. Okay, so without further ado, I know we're recording. Oh God, here we go. Oh, let's see. Okay, yep. So I need to, do I share before I do the PowerPoint, or does it matter? Okay, all right. All right. Okay. That's what I'm thinking. I don't know. That's all right. It's easy enough to fix. Hey. Come on back to, there's some. Share. You are sharing screen. Yep, there's my slide deck. Now, hopefully, it will see. Play from start. You got it? Okay. Okay. All right. So this is what we're going to talk about. I use this as an example. It is outside of Portland, but again, you'll see a lot of the same themes over and over and over. And what's nice about it is the contrast you can get, meaning in such short proximity, you can go from a restored, beautiful place with millions of dollars to this thing. All right. I call this my not friend, my not shit ass friend. Okay. Which Noah heard a lot because I'm not a fan of this thing, but it's going to go away soon. And so we'll talk about those sorts of things. Okay. But Kellogg Dam is just an example. There are many, many others. And again, that's why this is universal. You know, we pick certain details, but I'm sure you can find something in your community that would match some of the things we're going to talk about today. This is just what I have the data for. Okay. All right. So this long-winded thing is the official EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, definition of environmental justice. Okay. And you should know the division, and most people don't know, it's over 30 years old. Like, I think it started in 94, like really a long time. There's an entire division within EPA for environmental justice, but they've kind of gotten now current with all the IRA and IIJ money. They got a big push with all the environmental justice monies. And so that's why it's now very today, and it's on everybody's lips because there's all of these big federal dollars for it. And so now people are clamoring to wanting to know what the heck this is and can we get money for it and does it apply to me? But it's actually very old, all right? Older than the Y2K bugs that I mentioned, okay? All right, like fully, like I think it was 94, so it's 30 years old now. All right, the thing to focus on is this first sentence, the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin. And I'll show that too, just so the people there see it. Okay, the next slide just has basically that bit edited. Okay, so it's really that first sentence. And when I teach the course, I taught the undergrads and the grad students, and I asked them for definition, and they have to spit this back chapter and verse. Okay, the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to development, implementation, enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So that's officially, formally, what environmental justice is as per the Environmental Protection Agency since 1994. They just kind of haven't gotten any traction or done anything with that until recent times with the big federal push and the big federal dollars. Okay, so I just picked a bunch of random factoids about why environmental justice is a thing. Okay, so greater than 50% of people who live less than 2 miles from toxic waste facilities are people of color. 53% of all people living within 3 miles of the worst polluting coal plants are people of color. Communities below the poverty line have a 35% higher burden of particulate matter emissions, particulate diesels in particular, asthma alleys, if you ever heard that term, compared to the overall population. It gets that and a bit more, 50% more, 54% if you're Black or of color. Okay. And then just the factoid from Katrina that Black owners received on average $8,000 less in grant money when they applied for all their reparations for Katrina. So those are just some examples of environmental justice. And the people who created it from the start have used some of these, like, for example, in Black dominated cities like Houston or things like that, to demonstrate the disparity, particularly say during a recovery effort, who recovers from a national disaster and who doesn't, those sorts of things. Okay. All right. So that sets the stage for my non-friend. Okay. Because when you look at it from that background and the fair treatment and quote, whose river gets restored, I'll show you here in contrast, like literally less than 3 miles apart, a restored watershed versus an unrestored. Like you can literally, when you stand and do the tour, that's why I always go to the Kellogg Dam, because you can see the Kellogg watershed, and then to your left, you can see the Johnson Creek one. Like they're that close together, yet they're worlds apart. Okay. So when you're in an environmental justice community, before Illinois was the land of Lincoln, before the first shots of the Civil War were fired at Fort Sumter, before the Northern Shoshone Territory, known as Agua Peon, or River of the West, became Oregon, the 33rd state, there was the Kellogg Dam. It has been there pre-statehood, because it's again, in an impoverished community, that was ignored. While other parts were restored, this was left. A highway's since been built over it. There is now, I'll show you, you guys can probably see a little bit. So right there, for the people who are watching in Zoom, and I'll show you guys in the room, that is the pedestrian bridge under the Max line. Okay, to give you a sense of how compressed this is, that this is now literally in the middle of downtown Milwaukee. This Kellogg Dam, as you see right here, and for the people watching, it happens to be a point where there's no cars going by, but that's the highway, 99E. So you drive over it. As the Kellogg Dam is actually built and integrated into the highway. And again, it has been there since before Oregon. Okay, and from the moment it was illegal, because fish passage laws predate Oregon. So even then it was illegal. They just did it anyway and got away with it. Okay. So that just gives you a sense, and why, like the initial push of 15 million, and you realize it's going to be another 15 and another 15. It's going to be well over 50 million by the end, because just to get the boats to do the core samples, I just learned today, they have to do it in the middle of the night, and they lift the boats down in there by crane, and they do the core samples and then come back out again, because this is a highway. Like you can't do anything. I mean, like literally things don't fit. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons. I mean, there's a high school there. There's, and I'll show you these later as we progress through. There's a high school, there's downtown, there's several residential buildings, there's the church, you know, there's food pods. The Max comes through, there's a rail line, commercial rail, like, you know, Union Pacific. So it's all happening. And so that is why it's going to cost upwards of $50 million before it's done, because just the logistics of moving all of that around to remove this thing. Okay. So, you know, there was a lot of sneering as to why they got so much money, and like the whole rest of the region didn't get any because they got so much of it from NOAA, meaning. And then when people come and see it and they realize it's part of the highway, they just kind of go, oh, you know, this is a big thing. It's a big project. Okay. So just to give you a background for the watersheds, at least in Portland, I realize we're in a different one, but the slough, which kind of gets a lot of hype, and we were just talking about it today during our conversations. That's the one up in the Superfund site, super polluted, lots of problems, a huge BIPOC community, has been historically ignored. It dominates the top, all the stuff by the Columbia and the airport. Okay. As we move down, the big one that dominates most of the city is the Willamette. Okay. And then here's Johnson Creek. That's the big fancy one that gets millions of dollars out of whack and land donated and all sorts of things. Okay. And then I always remember Fano. The way to think of Fano, the F stands for grade F, because they're over there in a bunch of environmental degradation. In fact, I just drove through it today, like when you're over in kind of Cornelius and past Hillsboro and all the stuff past 217, where all the pickers live, and where it's all the water is polluted with pesticides. And, you know, they have some of the worst metrics in the entire city. But they're not a Superfund site. And also they don't have what we'll call the A word, anadromy. So they're over there kind of ignored, poor Fano. And then this one, Tryon, just like Kellogg, they just got a whole big grant to fix their big culvert. And hopefully both sides of the Willamette will open to cold water refugia simultaneously, east and west. Once they open up Kellogg, which would be down just past Johnson Creek, down here. Oh, sorry, that's hard to see, down here. And then Tryon, like, again, you can look across the river and see Tryon. Okay, so both sides of the Willamette will open simultaneously once that all actually happens. And Tryon, as you can see, that's more kind of the Southwest money set. So Lake Oswego and Dunthorpe and all of that. There is actually a state park, Tryon Creek State Park, that is the only state park fully contained within Portland city limits. So that's down there. So it kind of explains like how they, like Johnson Creek, have a whole lot of infrastructure and money and interest that some of the more neglected, like the Fanos of the world, don't get. Okay, so sort of remember the shape of the watersheds. Okay, and then I'm going to take you through a few maps that show you now the people in said watersheds. Okay, so remember what they generally look like. And this first map I'm going to show you is what's called areas of vulnerability, known as a heat map. There's a lot of variables that you can put in them, but overwhelmingly, there's always 4. You can add more, but there's always 4. And the 4 are always BIPOC, which, in case you don't know what that is, Black, Indigenous, people of color. Okay. Low income, low education, and renters, not owners, meaning they don't own their homes. So those 4 are always in the disparity metrics. You can add other ones like elderly, particularly say Asian elderly or elderly of color, of course, handicapped folks. There's all sorts of other things you can add to it, but those are always the base of the disparity metric. Okay. And so if you remember what Columbia looked like, and you can see all of that dark blue, the darker the blue, I call this the devil in the blue dots. So the darker the blue, the worse it is. So you see across the top where poor old Columbia Slough is just suffering. All right. And then you see all through here, that's northeast and southeast. That's what kind of has it, they almost adopted as like a pride now that is Felony Flats. But that's a lot of kind of disenfranchised far east Portland counties. Like if you ever hear of East County, there is no East County, it's East Multnomah County. And it's the part that's kind of been ignored because all the power and money set is over here in the Lake Oswego types. Okay. So if you look at this, just keep this in your mind, where the BIPOC communities are, where the area of vulnerabilities are. Okay. Then the next map, if it looks like it's the opposite, it is. So this is where the white people live. So they don't live in all of those areas of vulnerability. So it is complete polar opposite. All right. This shows you kind of the same thing. This is based on 1927 data, so almost 100 years old. They did, this was the Portland Development Commission and Planning and Sustainability. That's where I got these slides. They did a retrospective of their old data and applied it to modern day maps and basically found out that the 100-year map difference made no difference. It was exactly the same. So these maps of where the single family residents lived in 1927 is just like present day. Okay. So classically, again, I realize you may not know Portland. So classically, that this is what's called Alameda Ridge. Okay. So I know this is the land of timber and forests. So all the original timber barons lived here in Alameda Ridge. Okay. And they built their beach houses in Gearhart. Okay, so so it is connected to here. All right. This, sorry, here, kind of as we go. So that's kind of Alameda Ridge, and then it flows on a little bit. This one down here, as we're getting, so that you understand, this is Ross Island, this one. And this is a city limit. And then right across, right down here would be where Kellogg Dam is. So it's right across city limit, right across county limit. Okay. But right here, that little area of affluence, if you will, that's Eastmoreland, Westmoreland, Selwood, Reed College, those sorts of areas. Okay, like when you're in those parts of Portland, the way I describe those parts is kind of leave it to Beaverland. Okay, lots of big old homes, great big yards, you know, very, very fancy, whole lot of money, $1 million stuff. Okay, and have been there for 100 years. Okay. All right. And then across, of course, this is the new money set, essentially Lake Oswego, Dunthorpe, etc. Okay. So this is based on 1927 and it looks exactly the same today. All right. This is another way of showing it. The racially concentrated area of affluence, again, that looks exactly the same. Where those single family residences are, where that money is where the white people are. Okay, where they're not, where all of those things are the opposite, you see all of this pale. So, and this one, purple, is good. The darker color is the good. And you see, remember, this is all felony flats. Look at all of this is disenfranchised. This is all the stuff by the airport. If you hear of things like the neighborhoods of Cully, Maywood Park, where Earl Blumenauer's from, Centennial neighborhood, it's all through here. Okay, that's all. And when you hear about East County Rising, that's what they're talking about, the historically disenfranchised eastern edges of Multnomah County that don't get any infrastructure or money or anything, really. But that's where the retiring state rep, Earl Blumenauer, is from, Centennial. He's from this way. He's from out there in Felony Flats, okay? But all these other neighborhoods, all along across, all bordering the slough, you notice that it's just kind of pale and broke, okay? And what doesn't get mentioned, remember, Fano is out here, Beaverton, all the stuff past 217. So the stuff I drove through today, like Beaverton, Hillsborough, Cornelius, Forest Grove, all of these things that are pale and go into Tualatin Valley and then also into the Fano watershed. That's why it's an F. Okay. So again, they have environmental degradation that don't show up on Portland city maps because they're across the border into Washington County. But they have exactly the same metrics. There's no way they don't. Okay. All right. So this one is again showing the same thing. Where's the home ownership? Where the money is, that it looks precisely the same. What this one shows, however, and this is something that we talk about a lot within Portland, the red means red lines. Okay, so where neighborhoods were redlined, meaning they weren't allowed to own their homes through all sorts of illegal, really, banking and financial practices. Okay, so a lot of the neighborhoods that are now gentrifying were historically redlined. The people never owned their homes. They oftentimes turn to kind of shady investors, shady people who they thought they were paying their taxes and they weren't. Then they lost their homes because they never paid their taxes. And it's because they couldn't go to any of the legitimate places. And so that fed, like, you know, what used to be the Black neighborhood isn't anymore because it's all been displaced because they've lost their homes for all sorts of varying reasons. So the disparity matches exactly the redlining, matches exactly BIPOC, low rent, low education. You know, so the point is hopefully that you're seeing the same map over and over. And I think this is my last one. Yes, that basically it's showing where they get the mortgage interest reductions. And this is the modern map. And this is the 1927 map. So it's exactly the same. Alameda Ridge, Selwood and the Eastmorelands, Lake Oswego, Dumpthorpe. This is the 1927 one. This is today. Hasn't changed. Okay. So taking you back to the racially segregated areas of affluence, where Kellogg Dam is, remember, it's way down here in kind of the pale. All right. Now, this is a little bit deceiving because what is happening in that area is now gentrifying because they now have the max, because no one can afford Selwood in the Eastmoreland. They're coming across the city and the county line. And so that area is changing quite a lot. It used to be really densely packed, underserved community that's changing slightly. Okay. But the focus, like I said, remember, this is Johnson Creek. Okay. With the fancy, you know, this is where, you know, Reed College has a water fountain for their dogs kind of people. Okay. Versus poor old Kellogg down here. All right. So when you live on this side, that is what your watershed looks like, which is stunning. This is Crystal Springs Rhododendron Garden. In fact, one of my fellow commissioners, Chair Wall, did a lot of work on this project, and it is amazing. It all the hype and glory it deserves. It is absolutely beautiful. And I learned from her, one of the other reasons, not just the disparity metric, but that's one of the only places the chum come back. So, so Johnson Creek is really significant in that regard. Okay, and what happens is it has weird hours. So we were trying to do the tour. I always do the tour where I contrast Crystal Springs with Kellogg, but we couldn't do it because they're not open on Wednesday mornings or something. And then it's like $5 each or something. Like there's all of these, again, like we talk about barriers and like who gets to go and why, who gets to go and enjoy these gardens. So what we do often is just go right across the street to Reed Canyon. Okay, because they too are in Crystal Springs, and they did a private restoration project because they're a private college with a whole lot of money with, water fountains for the dogs. Okay, so they did a restoration, which is also stunning. Okay, and it's really like, so what we typically do is we go to Reed and then we come 3 miles down the road to Kellogg when we do the tour, just to show like you can ride your bike between the two and look at the contrast. And Reed, it's just amazing. It's great to go there with fish bio people because as you're walking and wandering through Reed and, they made a nice little path. It's glorious. And you can see the baby salmon and they know which one it is. Like, they're like, oh, that's the coho because it has a stripe or a dot or like, this or that thing. It's amazing. Like in Portland city limits, that this is happening. And Reed is hosting the Urban Ecology Symposium because of just that. Like Portland, by a factor of 2, outranks every other city in America in terms of we have 18 endangered species within our limits. And when Metro is even more. Okay, so it's not just the fish, it's also the eagles and like everything else that's happening. So by far, we are the place of urban ecology. And so Reed is hosting this symposium next month. But this is why, because it's again, like people and nature together, like literally as you're kind of casually walking through the college campus, like you can like wave to the baby salmon kind of thing. It's really fantastic. Okay. And this is this is the devil in the blue dots map. Okay. Remember all the disparity all through here and see how Milwaukee, it's kind of getting pale, but for a long time, straight through to Oak Grove. And then when you go further down to Gladstone, this was all just as dense as it looks over here. Okay, it's gentrifying for the reasons I've explained. But when you're on one side, and this is pale because a lot of it is taken up by actual Reed College grounds, okay? But we were on this side before. When we go into the disparity side, that's what your watershed looks like. And the people who have come, like for example, we were standing on this, because you can stand, it's a pedestrian bridge underneath the max. It's a little bit harder to see on, hopefully they can see it on Zoom, but it's that thing. And it's perfect because you can see the impoundment when you're standing on it. And yeah, Boney fell over. And I think what happened, all the people that were doing all the testing took away the scooter because they decided that the battery was toxic. I'm just like, would you look at that impoundment? Like, how is the scooter hurting that? I mean, it's got like I think there's a grocery cart, like stuff is sticking up. Like we were there at the time of a toxic algal bloom. Like this is God bless that Amy can smile while she's in the middle of this. She's one of the, she's with the North Clackamas Watershed Council. So they're out there in that impoundment. Okay, I know it's awful. Like you sink up to your whatever, like in just this silt and terribleness. And that is right under, like when you're standing at that pedestrian bridge under the max, that's what you're looking at. Okay. And every time I do the tour, like when we go from Reed Canyon and we come to here, they're like, this could look like Reed Canyon. Like, why is it so different? I mean, it's the same sort of terrain and the setup, but like this shouldn't be. This shouldn't, like, it's just so horrifying. It's really interesting. Every time the students are just so shocked. And this, Neil, who's Amy's partner in the North Clackamas watershed, they are a watershed of 2 instead of 1. Neil always tells a story that the only thing he has ever seen on this fish ladder is a river otter coming down. And you can see, like, a river otter would really have a ball. Like, look at this. This is fantastic. And like, and you saw on the slide before, like, what a disaster of a fish ladder. Like, what fish could get up it? Like, right here, right off screen at the bottom, there's literally a whirlpool. And it's like, how would the fish come and maneuver the turn and get through the whirlpool? And it clearly, they made it, I want to say in the 50s. It was just kind of to shut everybody up because they knew that they had a fish passage barrier. So they made a fish ladder. It's like, okay, we removed the barrier and then just moved on, right? Okay. That's how the fish get by, actually, is when it's high water. And they just book it. They just shoot this gap and go over to the impoundment and then beyond. Okay. They don't go up that ladder. Like I said, Neil has said, I've never seen anything but an otter in that ladder. So what he does get, really excited phone calls, probably about 5 times a year, and a map that I'll show you in a minute of the people in Happy Valley when they see a salmon. And it's because when it's high water, they just shoot the gap. It's not because they use the fish ladder. Okay. And by the way, right off screen, and you've seen it in the other slides where all the gravel and the debris and stuff is down there, where the dam is sitting, and you can see the little, I don't know, almost looks like a stilts sticking up. There's lamprey down there. Yeah. So, I mean, this is very much, as the students say, like, this could look like Reed Canyon. There's no reason that this couldn't look like Crystal Springs Rhododendron Garden. Like, it's all right there. It's all the same. All right. And so this is, okay, like there. So you can sort of see, like, down through here is where the lamprey are. Like, when you're standing, there's a little bridge where you're looking over, because also, to add to the mix, there's also Clackamas County Water and Treatment Plant is all right here. So just add that to the mix. So, like, there's so much happening in this spot, but the lamprey are happening in this spot. The committee said they're down there. So this will be important, not just for fish and salmonids. Like, I know we'll talk about the A word. In fact, this is the A word, and that I ban my wildlife biologists from saying, do not say the A word, because no one knows what that means. I've threatened them. I'll slap you if you say the A word. And because also there's things that aren't the A word there, like the lamprey. Okay, there's so many other important reasons and important things, and why we should open, why this should look like Crystal Springs Rhododendron Garden. It's not just the salmon. I mean, the salmon are fantastic, trust me. It's all about them, but there's so many other things. There'll be beavers, there'll be otters, there'll be bird life. Like, so many things are happening. Like, while you're standing there, like in that impoundment, in the toxic algal bloom, there's wood ducks. There's eagles. There's so much life that's happening in the toxicity. So imagine what it could look like when it's cleaned up. Okay, so it's not just about the A word. And, this is our typical speak. We restore 15.5 habitat acres. People kind of don't even know what that means. So we've kind of started to bring, like, how many city blocks is that? Like, just giving people some boundaries of, like, some metrics. There's going to be lots of regional trail connections, because the 40-mile loop that was around Portland, and when they started building, like, and we were talking about the cans, and the governor that started that, Tom McCall, he started the beach bill, the bottle bill, the bike bill, and the land use. And so the bottle bill that you guys do all your recycling for, and the bike bill is the regional trail connections. And that was originally the 40-mile loop that goes up one side of Portland, across the bridge, come back down. It's now something like 102 miles. It's huge. It just keeps growing and growing. And that's part of that regional trail connection. Once it's built and we build all the bridges and stuff across the new dams, or, well, the new bridges and culverts and things. Okay. Highway bridge improvement, because it's not earthquake proof. I mean, you can look at that thing. Like, I really wish that I'd never seen it, because it's sort of like, wow, I drive across this thing. I mean, you just can't believe it. It's been here before Lincoln, and we're driving on it, big trucks. Like, it's like I said, you wish you hadn't seen it. It's sort of like the Hood River Bridge. You wish you hadn't seen it. So it's like, that thing's headed to Cape D. Like, we need to fix it fast. And then, of course, improve flood and storage control. And that's actually why the Clackamas offices are there. The water treatment plants, they're doing a lot, because there's a lot of flooding in that area. And for a long time, what happened, they just recently got a Metro grant for this. So what's called Three Creeks and North Clackamas Park. So here's the Kellogg Dam and then Kellogg Lake. Okay. So this is all part of Clackamas WES, which is Water and Environmental Services. They just got a big Metro grant to do restoration in those areas, because what has happened, since they're the stormwater and the flood people, they couldn't do restoration work. So they got a Metro grant to do so. Okay. And all of this, if you look, it all connects, and Three Creeks are the three together: Phillips, Mount Scott, and Dean, which create eventually Kellogg Creek and the dam. Okay. And this is Happy Valley. The people in the playgrounds that call me excitedly when they see the salmon, that shoot the gap at Kellogg Creek. Okay. So it shows, like, they will get through like, this is a really degraded area. It's going to be amazing wildlife center when they're done, because they get salmon and steelhead in there all the time. It's behind an aquatic center. It's behind a community college. There's a high school, the Clackamas Town Center. I mean, there's so much happening right there. But just like Reed College, the salmon will just come by and visit. You know, if we make it hospitable for them, they'll come by. So hopefully, that's what the Metro Grant and Clackamas Water Environmental Service are doing, and then removing the big bad, the Kellogg Dam here. And of course, draining Kellogg Lake and all, it's really not a lake. It's, as you saw, it's a whole bunch of sediment and terribleness. Yes. Of Kellogg Dam. So I've forgotten his first name. Kellogg was his last name. But donation to land claim when he came and was married. So he got the 160 plus his wife's 160. And the property that he claimed was both sides of Kellogg Creek. And what's now what we call now, named for him, Kellogg Creek. And he dammed it to power a flour mill. And so that flour mill was then in turn used to feed the gold rush in California. So it was really short-lived. In fact, there's no pictures. We know that that happened, but there's like no pictures or no records of that mill or where, like we know kind of where it was from historical records, but there's very little evidence around like the rest of it. Like there's not a historical site because again, now it's the interstate and Clackamas WES and the metro stop. It's like all these other things, but the dam was built to power the flour mill. And then when it was abandoned, it was abandoned. They didn't bother to remove it, is the problem. And this, if we get, like when you get way back, this is Kellogg Creek going all the way back, and look at Dean Creek, and look at Phillips Creek, they're spring fed. So this will be, once we get rid of that dam, cold water refugia. And in fact, the Chinook word, and I have it somewhere, I have to, and of course I can't say it, but it translates to Cold Creek. That's actually what Kellogg Creek was called. It was Cold Creek because it's spring-fed cold water. As was Johnson and as was so much, as was Tryon. So that's why when we release these dams and we set these creeks and rivers free, it's going to go back to that cold water refugia, which is good for salmon. And we already know what's happening with Johnson and like how they go and visit the students. It will happen in all those other watersheds as well. Okay. But yes, it was there again illegally because Fish Patches predated statehood. So he just built it and didn't tell nobody and powered his mill and then they left it there. And then as the city of Milwaukee built up around it, it stayed. Yeah.
How did the state build the highway over it without doing the culvert work?
Again, I think that's what the kind of that crappy fish ladder, they got all these exceptions. And right now, actually, ODOT owns it. So it's, and so that's part, because it's part of the highway. And so, and what, at least with us, like, we go back and forth with ODOT about, culvert replacement and like they want, can we have a waiver for this one if we do this one? Because what happens is, at least now, to replace it, you have to mitigate at another site of equal, I guess, concern. And so, or you get exceptions. And I think what happens is they kept getting an exception. I think that's what happened. And until they didn't get sued, but I think they were close. And then Kellogg came along in terms of, and you'll see at the end, when we get to Senator Merkley, earmarked some money to kind of get it started. And then that's when I got some traction. But yeah, it's been like shady from the start. Like, how is it there? Why was it not ever taken away? How do they build a highway over it? Like, and get away with that? And then they put that silly little fish passage thing to like meet the rule for fish passage. But I mean, they were fish bios and engineers involved in that. How they kind of had to know, looking at it, that that was not going to work. It's everything about it is head scratching. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And again, in a community that understood river restoration or didn't have so much disparity and so much poverty and so much environmental degradation, if they were on the Johnson Creek side, there'd been a whole lot of questions being asked. And there are all the time, still to this day, at Johnson Creek. You know, there's still a whole lot happening where it's just an echo chamber when you're in a poor community because they don't know. And that's the tragedy of environmental justice. That's really the tragedy, is that lack of knowledge and awareness about your environment and nature and like what you should even ask for. Like, you know, like I said to the talk, whose river gets restored? it's deeper than that. Who knows to even ask? Who knows that river restoration is a thing? Who even knows, like, people every day drive across that dam and don't know it's there. They don't know. And so there's going to be a huge education in that community about when the construction and removal of that dam happens. It's sort of like, by the way, like the highway is going to be shut for like a year. And like, and because people don't get that that's a dam. Like people are completely not understanding. So, which is why we're trying to bring some new environmental justice speak and getting away from just the A word and talking about strong community support and education and making sure they understand what that is and why. Okay. Opportunities for community engagement, because you got to realize, so this is, well, quote, Kellogg Lake is the silt-filled thing. That's going to be all green space. That's not going to be a lake anymore because the dam won't be there. All the impoundment's going away. 14.5 acres. It can be an incredible green space. It can, it can be so many things. So trying to get that community engaged to understand, like, hey, by the way, you're going to get all of this new stuff. Like, what are we going to do with it and how are we going to shape it? Do you want a basketball court there? Do you want a garden? Like, all those sorts of things. Okay. It's an equity focus area. So if you hear about Justice 40 and all of the bazillions of dollars going towards environmental justice, this is one of the areas that they have focused on. And the proximity to Milwaukee High School. Milwaukee High School, it's at least 50% BIPOC. It used to be higher, and it's 60% free or discounted lunch, just to show you again how impoverished that area is, just right across from all the fancy. It's changing because it's gentrifying. But yeah, and this gives you a sense. That's the Milwaukee station, the food carts and the beer gardens. And see, there's the highway. It's right there. This car is just driven over the Kellogg Dam. Okay, so it's all compacted. It's all right there. Okay, and it is an amazing little food cart garden. And the high school kiddies come, and the train comes by. That's where you've seen the pedestrian bridge, but the actual tram, the TriMet, the light rail comes by. It's a station stop there for the TriMet light rail. Okay, so that's all in that spot, all of it. Like, because we're doing a tour there, meaning ODFW is doing a tour there in about 2 weeks. And so the people went and walked it and they said, it's 3 blocks. 3 blocks. There's all of this stuff happening and then very compact succession. Okay. And now this guy, lovely man, he's now a state rep. But I think he still is a wildlife photographer. His name is Mark Gamba, and his last name is Bowman, Greg Bowman. So they made two sets of 2 documentary films. The first one was of that Three Creeks Clackamas watershed that I showed you on the map, and that was it was the last lonely tree. So they're trying to do some restoration work in that area. The second one was called Undam It, and it's now 10 years old. So it was 2013. And so they did a documentary film about this dam and like, why is this here? Like all the questions you guys are asking me today, like, why is this thing? Like, how? Like, it's been here for hundreds of years. Nobody can even tell me why. And there's a cameo of him, like when he shot the film, because he went to a city council meeting. He eventually became a city councilor. He became the mayor of Milwaukee, is now the state rep for Milwaukee. And he's remained in the frame. And so that is now him present day, or presenter day, at the signing of the first earmark, the first 500,000 that Senator Merkley, who he's shaking hands with, was able to earmark and kick off all the funding, and eventually led to the 15 million NOAA grant, and then all the ongoing grants that they'll be going through with all. They're in phase 2 now because they've got to get to 4, so they'll need more money. But yeah, so that is the quick summary of Kellogg Dam. Of course, it is much more complex than that. And what I often do is take people on the tours of each, like, this is what it could look like, but this is what it does look like, kind of thing. And I'll use that to segue into what Noah asked is, can we talk about how this is not just an urban story? And that is something that I talk about environmental justice all the time, because Portland is always in the paper about it. and like our urban canopy, or this or that and the other. Like it's just, it gets, the Columbia Slough just got 20 million. I mean, all of those things need to happen. There's huge environmental need, huge environmental justice issues, but it's not just us. Okay. The environmental justice issue is everybody's issue. And so what we wanted to talk about is how can we bring it to you guys to like a more rural area? Okay. And the commissioner that is from the Klamath lost her natural mind when she first saw this because, come on, thingy. I'm trying to do this for the benefit of the Zoom people. So hopefully I'm not driving you guys crazy. There's the Klamath. That dot looks just as bad as Kellogg. Ontario, when you blow it up, is bad. Coos Bay is over here. That's Hood River County. How the heck is that like a deep blue dot? Like the more you look at it, exactly, I can see people frowning. You're just like, wait a minute. Like the more you look, the more you see. And you're just like, how is this? And I use this is the state map. And I've since gotten updated versions of the state map, but to demonstrate we cannot ignore the rural areas in this. Environmental justice is not just an urban problem. It's everywhere and it's everybody. It's about disparity. And there's lots of disparity in rural places for sometimes similar reasons, but sometimes different. Okay. But one of the things, and this was with, I did a talk like this with the Hood River Watershed group. So I have some Hood River statistics, but I think you'll see how it directly translates to a rural community, say at the coast, as opposed to at the base of Mount Hood. So I start with the Train of Tears. Okay. That's the only picture that I think exists from the Hood River County Historical Museum. And in case you're not familiar with the story of the Issei and the Nisei and what happened in Hood River, post Chinese Exclusion Act, we couldn't import Chinese labor anymore. So as a nod to the city of Milwaukee, they now have the cherry drop, the Bing cherry, because that was the Chinese laborer who actually did all the grafting and created what is now the cherry that bears his name. He went home to visit his family. He couldn't come back because of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Okay. So Milwaukee has now honored him, and there's now at front of City Hall a ginormous Bing cherry. It's amazing. It's this red metallic thing with a stem and it lights up. It's fantastic. And it's the story of Ah Bing and the Bing cherry. Now that happened and everybody kind of went, whoops, who's going to work and build the railroad? And so this is American way. We import foreign labor, right? So this time they imported the Japanese. Okay. And this happened all over the Americas, not just North, but North and South. And so Issei means first generation. Okay. Japanese. The Issei built the railroad, what is now the cutesy little Mount Hood Railroad. And you can go out there and do the touristy thing. And it's super fun. It's beautiful. They were the imported labor to clear the stumps and build the railroad. Okay. Fast forward to World War II and all the xenophobic issues that happened around World War II after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, after the Japan was marching up the Pacific. That's when the internment camps happened after an executive order that basically was a land grab, basically is what it was, just disenfranchised, stole from a whole lot of wealthy, successful people, frankly. They were just growing in their orchards. They were doing their thing. And the Nisei in particular were American citizens. They were born here. Didn't help them none, poor darlings, because they were sent via the Train of Tears, via the train their grandparents sent. They were sent to Tule Lake internment camp. So, and that train, again, it went straight from Hood River down to the Union Pacific lines, connected into California, Tule Lake, right across in the Klamath, but on the California side of the Klamath. Okay. So all of Hood River, Issei, and Nisei went to Tule Lake in mass. Okay. Via the Train of Tears. All right. 42. Yep. And that, like I said, that's the only picture that and Hood River County is the historical meeting has it. In fact, it's May of 42 because they just did a big retrospective at the museum and kind of the commemoration of the date in 22. It's May of 42. I don't know exactly which day, but yeah. All right. So instead of just showing you glum and terrible and unhappy pictures, These are the Issei and the Nisei. Like this right here is D, like Parkdale and D and all the stuff down towards Hood River. And again, all of that stuff, that's all the old orchards and the amazing, like, still the Kirakara land that's down there in Parkdale and D is something like 60 different types of apples. I didn't even realize there were 60 different types of apples. But it's just showing that this is all pre-42 families that lived in the area. Okay. American citizens. All right. But that is what happened to them. That happens to be San Francisco. Hood River ones were just shipped straight. Everybody else was rounded up to these, intake centers, assembly centers. In fact, the Portland Expo Center is the assembly center for this area. Okay. And one of the things in my course, and I'm sure Noah remembers, like I was hammering the Metro people. I'm like, where is the sign? Where is something that explains why this was built? It was specifically built as an assembly center to send the folks from Portland to either Tule Lake, Minidoka, or Hot Mountain. Okay, that is the story of the Portland Expo Center, full stop. It's become other things, of course, but it was built as the assembly center. And I'll never forget, the first time I went there, and I'll go there again for the sportsman show, I remember thinking, this is a really weird stockyard. Like, just the design of it is just bizarre. Like, what is this place? And it turns out that's exactly what it was. It was a way to herd up people and then ship them off to the camp. Okay, so that explains a lot. Even though people are like, what does this have anything to do with? That's your disparity metric. That's why Hood River's dot is so blue. You've disenfranchised entire people. And furthermore, what's the American way? Import foreign labor. Okay, so when you got rid of the Issei and the Nisei, everybody kind of went, whoops, just like they said when they got rid of the Chinese. And another executive order came in. Enter the braceros. Okay, again, 1942, the Mexican Farm Labor and Agreement Act that went on for more than 20 years. It went on from World War II all the way into Vietnam. Okay, so they replaced the Issei and the Nisei working and picking in the fields in the same disenfranchised areas, not able to own their homes, BIPOC, low education, all the metrics that you talked about that I've shown you on all my other maps. We can make the same exact ones for Hood River. And this is the Vaqueros, like V for victory, it's not peace. This is them on the trains in Mexico because, they were coming. They wanted all men to come and work in the fields, right? This is kissy huggy bye-bye, right? When they go across to the American border. And of course, they get sprayed with DDT upon their arrival. All right. It's amazing that he's able to smile, our lovely brown boy, with his cordito. So this, corto in Spanish means short. So it's a short-handled hoe. So this is kind of a classic vaquero image. That's what he spent doing his whole day. Okay. So when you look at that level of disenfranchisement, that explains the Hood River map to me. That's what happened. That's why their dot is so blue. Okay. Because when you have that shift of wealth, that theft of land, that theft of assets, herding people into internment camps, like none of them ever got any of that back. They didn't say, my bad, By the way, the 442nd is the most decorated infantry regiment in all of U.S. history. It's an all-Japanese regiment. Again, because it was racist, everything was segregated. They were American citizens. They were shipped off to war. If they hadn't been shipped off to an internment camp, sometimes both things happened to them. They are still the most decorated combat infantry regiment in history. You think maybe we give their land back? Nah. Nah. Okay. So most, as you probably are aware, didn't come back. Men, the story of Yasui, the Yasui family, particularly Min Yasui, he was the lawyer, the Nisei lawyer that was American born, American citizen, went to U of O law school, tried to bring up the court case and was slapped in solitary confinement for it. So he is still the only Presidential Medal of Freedom winner. Still to this day, related to all that. So again, everyone says, what does this have to do with hydrology? Like, everything. Like, this is why the disparity exists. This is why things are so degraded. So when you look at Hood River, where they've done a lot of great projects is the A word, where the salmon and the steelhead are, all that wonderful stuff. But in the neighborhoods like Odell and Parkdale and D, where I just showed you, where the Issei and then Braqueros live, very little restoration has been done. It matches perfectly. So again, I'm not trying to pick on poor old Hood River. I mean, like, this story you can tell it over and over and over again. It's just about your details and where you fit into that story. Systemic is just that, it's systemic. You can plug and play what's appropriate. Okay. And I just leave that as again, that foundational thing. Like, this is not just about Portland. This is not just about cities. Like, everybody out there, this is a bigger, larger problem that's going to take, and that's why hopefully the feds will continue their involvement, because you realize this isn't one group. This isn't one thing. This is so much bigger than that. And I think, the first thing is understanding the story, just understanding how we got here. Like, hopefully I didn't sound accusatory. Like, I don't have anything against anybody. It's about, like, I'm asking, why the heck is that dot blue? What like, to me, the visualization of data is so powerful, because you start to ask questions, for me anyway. You think Klamath, this is why Commissioner Hatfield-Hyde lost her mind. That's actually, I didn't realize until I talked to her, that is the poorest region of the state. They have the most environmental degradation, and it's specifically right here where the Sprague and the Williamson come into Upper Klamath Lake, and it's just a you-know-what show, and it's super polluted, and the lake turns blue, and it's toxic algal blue. Like, it's just endlessly crazy down there. The suckerfish are dying, the salmon, everything. It's like, it's just bad upon bad upon bad. Like, and you think, how does this happen? Well, the tribes lost their land. It was all logged. It was, like, it's it's the same story. Like, we just add their details, the Klamath details, to that same story, and you'll find out, like, that's why that dot is so blue. And she said, like, that is the part of the Klamath, that is the linchpin. Like, we're focusing on the dams, and everybody thinks, yay, the dams are gone. They just did the drawdown of J.C. Boyle. That's the only one of the 4 that's in Oregon. Okay, yippee. That doesn't mean suddenly flip a switch next week, the salmon are coming back. That used to be the 3rd biggest run in the Pacific. Don't think that'll ever happen again, because of all the environmental degradation, all the drought, all the chronic problems that have come on to the Klamath after that, how polluted Klamath Lake is, because whatever fish has got to get out of Klamath Lake and up the Williamson and the Sprague to the spawn, right? And that's what she's saying. Like, that says it all. This has to be our focus. That's the linchpin of the Klamath. If we don't fix that, where are the salmon going? Where are those suckerfish going? They do their great migration, not as far as the Klamath, but they migrate down the Lost River and back up again. If we don't focus on that, what are we doing? So that I think, and again, this is a rural place, a poor place that has the same disparity metrics as, God, you could pick New York City to be the same, and in fact, when we're at Kellogg Creek, and we'll be there when there's low tree cover and you can see it, one of the things I show to them is, when you look across the west, it's a 56% canopy cover. Do an about face, look east, 21%. That's the same as New York City. We have the biggest urban canopy disparity metric in the nation. And it's really apparent when you're down at the riverbank and you could just see it. And that explains all of the heat island effects. It explains so many things. There's so many things in that statistic, just that statistic alone. And again, like, we're just like New York. New York will have their problems, et cetera. So again, it's not about accusatory. The past is the past, it's done. Learn about as much as you can, as much as you want to inform your decision. But it's done. It's in the books. We cannot change that. But we can inform our future and pivot. Oh, I guess we can inform our present and pivot to a different future. That's the way I see it. And that is an example. This is just south of Kellogg Creek, the Clackamas River. Used to be called Crack-a-My-Ass, poor river. because it was just rough. I mean, the Fred Meyer drainage, so many things were just polluting it and destroying it. Poor thing. And I had the opportunity, again, this was with some Metro staff, and we got to do a float and see a lot of the river restoration projects. And the Clackamas is booming. Like they are doing like record coho because they've had a lot of focus and they've gotten some money and they got some restoration projects. There's still a lot more to go. There's still like creosote logs and fences. There's still some problems, but it just shows like all around Kellogg, there's all of this positivity going on. It should be happening at Kellogg. There's no reason that it won't. There's no reason not to. And the fact, like I said, that despite all of that, it still amazes me that those lamprey are down there. I just can't believe it, but they are. Exactly. Oh, exactly. But when we get rid of that, those lamprey are they're going straight up. They're just sitting there waiting. I mean, they're like the sturgeon. They're dinosaurs. They're prehistory. This is just a little click in time to them. So, I mean, it's just phenomenal. And I think, again, moving away from menagerie and look at all these other species that we can benefit. Yes, it is the salmon, but it is everything else. Like we've got to get some more metrics into it instead of that singular. Look at the benefit to people. Look at benefit to the heat island effect. Look at the benefit to the urban canopy. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. I know the tribes in particular are excited about the lamprey because, they get stuck in the dams. They do it. Dams, I call them salmon shredders, but they are sturgeon annihilators. I mean, between what they do to the sturgeon and the lamprey are just next level. And if we don't get a handle on that, those species are going to go extinct. We're really in trouble with them. So it's kind of fun that those lamprey are just kind of waiting, like, y'all humans, come on, get rid of this dam. And they'll just boogie right up there because Hood River did that with the Powerdale Dam. It was decommissioned in 9 and 10. And since then, they've just tracked. They're making their way up to Punchbowl Falls. They're just on their march, the lamprey. So it's like if we get out of their way, I think, sometimes, benign neglect would be better than what we're doing. So, and like I said, I just wanted to show something positive. That's the Clackamas River. That is a shining example. Hopefully we'll tour that someday. And they will keep surging. They're doing well, like everything. Coho seem to be doing great. Chinook and the rest kind of not so much. But it shows that this was a really polluted heck of a mess to something that is really doing really quite well now. And that's me.
Thank you.
So, I guess questions. Do we stop recording? What do we do with the Zoom thing? You leave it on? Okay. Yeah, do you guys in the room have questions that I guess you would watch and see? Do they have somebody out there in the world have questions? Yes.
No, thanks, Leslie. That kind of opened up a whole nother angle of why there are they avoid those neighborhoods. And I guess I have connected.
Sorry, what avoids?
Well, all your black spots, and being the people, not having the houses that.
Right. Yeah, like why it's missing. Yeah, I often say, it's this map. There was a whole talk that Noah saw. It's called The Devil in the Deep Blue Dot, where I just go through this map and the other maps that are kind of those heat maps that show where this lives. But you're right. Like, why was it missed? I hate the term hiding in plain sight. Like, just because you don't see something doesn't mean it's hiding. It means you don't see it. And and I think that's what this exposes is that, and that's why I find, like with GIS, which is how a lot of this was created, and that whole visualization of data and story mapping, and why this is so important. We have such powerful tools now where we can tell stories in a profoundly different way that resonate, I think, much more with people. And like it's so most people, I always get, especially when I'm students, just these gasps, like when I go from this one to that one, like people are just like, what? What is that? And And I think because that explains it all. And I call Pandora, like I call environmental justice like the can of snakes or the vortex, like you say, and like everything opens up, like, because in that is health access to healthcare, it's heat islands, it's urban canopies, it's, you know, food security, it's access to fresh food. I mean, it just, you know, transportation, like it just builds and builds and builds. And you're just like, and in many ways, to me, it gives everyone else an excuse to glom on, if you will. Like, you know, we hopefully at ODFW, because we're involved in Kellogg Dam, this is kind of how we get our name into a new space. Like by, say, in an urban area, focusing on some different metrics. I think to me, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for the transportation people. You know, I know a lot of kind of food and water justice people that are really focused on, again, like, here, I'll go back. Slide, go. There. Like, if you're going to take over an abandoned warehouse and do a vertical grow for vegetables, do it there. That's where it's needed. But I think also it helps people, like these areas are also polluted. So like, you know, planting in the dirt kind of probably isn't a thing. So, so like, you know, raised beds, like indoor gardening, like, you know, just again, like kind of it opens up, like you said, so many new thoughts and new spaces and like where you can be in it, you know, for me, you know, I'm a doctor and I've done a lot of health stuff. I mean, it's all the same. It's all interrelated. It's just, I think we never told the story well, or told the story in a way that people understood. And I think what laid it bare is a lot of things that laid it bare, but I mean, I know the city of Portland probably will forever have PTSD from the heat effect, that heat island, when hundreds of people died. And you can look at this map and you know where they died. You know, where they didn't have, you know, urban canopy cover, where they were poor, where they couldn't get to the cooling centers because there was no transportation, like, you know, on and on and on. Like, so all the heat island deaths, the devil and the blue dots, all of this, and St. John's as well. You know, I mean, like pretty much 100%. And also it tells the story that I think it's also educational because some of the students, you know, they're undergrads and grads, and like they can't believe, they're like, how come I never heard of redlining and what that is and how that shaped the city of Portland and what does that even mean? You know, like, so it just gives people, again, we're talking about environment, but then you're also talking about redlining, and it just gives a way to kind of, I always talk about that big tent, like building that big tent and invites a whole lot of people, gets a whole lot of ideas, get some things going, you know, and again, not doing this. You know, it's because
It sounds to me like you're talking about education is one of the main things.
I think
And when you're going like that, people quit.
exactly. And you're not educating when you're doing that. That's scolding. You know, that it serves nothing and no one. You know, I was speaking, so our commission, there's 7 of us. And our neighbors to the north, there's 9 of them, and boy, are they a hot mess. And they just do nothing but fight. They do nothing but this. And that's one of the things, like we won't have group meetings when we're supposed to, like about the Columbia and all these things, and just we're like, yeah, Antichrist, like, and it's just interesting because I was having a chat with a lady today, and she's like, please keep Oregon, like, you know, like at least come and talk to people, like don't do this polarizing, everybody hollering and screaming, like they fight in commission meetings, they fight in the press, the staff are fighting each other. I mean, they are a mess, like, and they're doing this, they're not achieving anything. They're not solving anything. You know, it's like, to me, like, I would not serve on a commission like that.
I have a question about
Yeah.
the restoration. So it's a huge project, obviously.
Which one, Kellogg Dam?
Yeah,
Mm.
it's a huge opportunity. How do you work that against climate change? What is
Oof.
it that you do to make sure this is not just the building the sea?
Yeah. No, I agree. The hope is, and it's literally hope, because you're right. How do we proof it against climate change? What are the big problems with climate change? I think the biggest is we don't know, frankly. I mean, like literally in a really frank way, because the way I try to explain it to people is everybody understands the cycle: winter, spring, summer, and fall, right? The 4. Got it. Everybody understands attenuation and it modulates, okay? So we're not just cycling, but we're like doing this all at once. So everybody understands the cycle. Most understand attenuation, 10 to 40%, meaning it's cycling, but it's swinging much more wildly. It's just all over the place, like 10 degrees to 50 degrees, just everywhere. What few people understand is the shift. And the shift is actually the most important thing. The shift is ocean currents have shifted. The jet stream has shifted. These shifts are permanent within our lifetime. They're not going back. It took hundreds of years for us to knock them out. They're not turning around in a day. Okay. And so all this wild weather and all the stuff we're experiencing, we need to stop. This is our weather. It's not extreme weather. This is going to be with us for our lifetime, and the hope is, can we start to modulate that and make that better? So, yeah.
So you're not necessarily restoring, you're not recreating the system that comes with us, because the system that was.
Exactly. That's what's happening in the Klamath. You're exactly right. And that's one of the hardest messages to get across to people is just because we do this, there's no guarantee the salmon come back. We hope, but we hope we've not wrecked it enough that they can still find their way to Happy Valley. But there's actually no guarantee, because with climate change and drought and habitat change, and we've drained too many lakes, it might not be a thing. So, and that's kind of why I say that we need to get some different metrics in there. And we need to talk, like the lamprey might just do fabulous, and we can still clean it up and get the pesticides out of there. I mean, there's so many other things that we can do, but we have been so hyper focused, in my opinion, on anadromous. That's why I call it the A word. There's so much more to it. There's so much more to it. So I think that's one of the biggest issues we have is explaining that. It's just, we can do all of this and we can bring back that cold water refugia, because remember it was named Cold Spring. That was its indigenous name, because they come from cold springs. They come from those aquifers. It's cold water. Once we get rid of that dam and get rid of all those hot sediment awfulness and Boney and the impoundment and the scooter and all that, once that all goes away, that's cold water. Will we have wrecked it too much that the salmon are still there, or whatever's still there? You know what I mean? So it's hard. It's hard. I think, we just sort of say, like, we can't leave it like this, and we do our best. That's all we can say at this stage, and which is kind of an answer that makes you queasy. But like, when you look at like the numbers of the steelhead, like those it's like a spit the coffee moment. We will lose that species by the end of the decade if we're not careful. They are doing badly, and we still don't know why. So, so, I mean, you know what I mean? So but you gotta try. Like, is it too far gone? But you try anyway, and then but you've benefited everything else that still remains. Yay. It's awful. It's an awful scenario. I'm with you. I'm with you. And it's also something people don't want to hear. That's the other thing. They want to hear, we removed the dams in 24 and the salmon came back in 25. That's what they want. And it just is not that simple.
Well, there's not that. It's gonna be different, but how do we build it?
Right. Yep. Exactly. How do we mitigate? Yep. And there's people trying. That's all I can say. That's all I can say. And the hope is, again, like, stop making those mistakes of the past. Like, how do we do it? Like, there's more dams. Like, I think the snakes are the latest one that they want to come out. Like, how do you do it? Like, how? And knowing that what we rebuild, like you said, there is no going back. There's no going back to before. Like, Tule Lake was a lake for 1,000,000 years, and now it's a mud puddle. It's drained. Like, there's no going back to that. That is well and proper effed. So, so like, now what? Like, how do we, what do we recoup out of that? Yeah.
We have a box to check. Do we think this project is disproportionately tax rate? That's it. There's no actual metric that we're asked to take for the project. Things like food security were the first weeks. That's, I think, one of the big problems. But the reason for these maps are not getting better, but worse, is that when when we're doing restoration, we're thinking about it as if it's still a preserved system, it's not.
Right. And also we're thinking about it, like, that's one of the things that I bring up, like with ODFW all the time. I realize fish and wildlife and their habitat and people, like we are in all of that. Like, and we're the ones affecting it the most. We've got to put ourselves in that equation. We've kind of like separated, like you said, like almost like we're looking at a terrarium or something. And we're so very concerned with that A word. But like you said, what about the people? Like, I showed the pictures of the food carts. I mean, the high school kids, and like you can make a football field, but like look at all these things you could do for the people. But that is absolutely never a metric. And that's why I'm saying we've got to bring more metrics into that. We can't just look at the Salmon. It's like just look at the other benefits, the other things that come with it. And like you said, food security, like lamprey, and like that's not a species. Like, I mean, they're kind of weird and funny looking, and they're super cool. They're super cool. But like that's not something I would look for particularly. But I mean, I think it's about like, I don't see the world in a circle. I see a line. Like culturally, that's just not where I am. So like it really is about understanding someone that has a completely different, or trying to understand someone that has a completely different perspective than you, and therefore offering different metrics that make no sense to you, but it makes a whole lot of sense to them. So, that's the thing. I think we need to broaden that. And I think one of our big issues, one of the ODFW, I call them the fish boys, because the executive senior leadership in fish division is all male. And one of them, in fact, I will do the talk with him about Justice 40 and about like he was instrumental in getting the NOAA grant and doing a lot of other funding, like with Hood River, like with a number of different communities, getting all of this EJ money into Oregon. And he's a hydrologist by trade. And, he said that's one of the battles. He's like explaining to like hydrologists, like why you need this. Like they completely, it's like, why are you talking about Emmett Till and like food carts? And what in the world does that have to do with hydrology? like everything. That's why there are no hydrologists of color. That's why they don't know it's a field. They don't know it's a thing. They don't know, they don't know that they can bring this to their community and improve it. Like, it's about breaking down those barriers instead of like, like that science brain that's like this many parts per million. And like the DNA of this fish that swim by, and can we measure it? Like, how about the person? How about that neighborhood that's right above where you're standing? How about them? So we have a long way to go, but we are starting to get like, I call him Craig, the good egg, because his name is Craig. And we're getting the Craigs of the world, the hydrologists that are clever and are getting grant money. And even him, he's just so funny. He says to me, this is someone that created this map. Okay. And he handed it to me at a meeting. And then he says he doesn't know where the projects are. And I just about fell over. I'm like, Craig, you're looking at, you created that map. Where those dots are the project. And so he's starting to come around, you know what I mean? It's like, yes, you do. You're looking right at them. Do you see them? And that's that whole hiding in plain sight. And so like, he's really come around. And like I said, we'll do a joint presentation because he knows Justice 40 back to front and all, all that things. And like, one of the reasons that Oregon is a leader in getting some of the federal dollars is because he's like really dedicated and focused to bringing things like Kellogg Dam, Wallowa Dam, so many projects all over the state. So, but yeah, I think it is about like, we have to expand our metrics. Like we can't stay as we are. Like I talk about all the time, going from the singular to the plural. We've got to make that shift. Mad props to the salmon. They're amazing. They're a keystone species. They're all of these things, but there are so many other things out there.
I think we're at the point where the next step is a definition of environment. In my, as a practitioner, environmentalism doesn't fit with environmental justice.
Right.
There's like this very white dominated environmental conservation, like trust.
Right.
And preservation. It's environmental justice, which is really what we're talking about here.
Right.
Just like bringing in new metrics and not thinking quite as much about the esoteric data.
Right. Right. No, I agree. And so much of environmentalism, if you will, involves land, meaning land owners. You know, whereas environmental justice is just the opposite. These are people that don't own, not even their house, let alone land. So yeah, you're right. Like I talk a lot with one of the commissioners about like bringing equity into the commission. You know, it's just this expectation that it's these old, wealthy, retired white men that can afford to do this, you know, kind of situation. And it's like, you know, what about people that don't have passive income? What about people who don't own land or their house? What about people who depend on earnings? And like, you know, and like you said, bringing that environmental justice part into environmentalism and taking away that elitism and like almost, you know, on Walden Pond, like, you know, this thing that we, you know, that we observe, you know, in serenity and solitude and beauty. It was never that. It was always populated by people. It was always managed by people, you know, and when you're talking about all the forest and the fire stuff, I just like forests need fire. Indigenous people proved that for millennia. And just trying to bring something as basic as that back into the space is just like, no, you have to leave it untouched. I'm like, it was never untouched. It was always manipulated in every way, you know, like, you know, and so it's just, I agree, we have to get away from that John Muir aesthetic. Like we set up these national parks and then you have to go and see them. Yeah, it's like, why can't we have trees and grass where we live? Yeah,
It's like environmentalism.
yeah.
What should be.
Yep. And the realization that we are in this space, you know, that's the thing. It's that we have, I see it from both angles because as a doctor, when we talked about like some of these communities and asthma alleys, that was something I always said is that we have these severe asthmatics in these terribly polluted neighborhoods. And we treat their severe asthma as a doctor. And then we send them right back to that polluted neighborhood. Like, what are we doing? That we're going to get the patient back, and we do, you know. And now it's the reverse, where I'm saying, like, would you look at all this stuff and like they're completely focused on the environment and completely forgetting about the people. Like it's like the two aren't connected. Like it's like health and the environment should be the same. It's a continuum, but everyone seems to think it's this line, like we're somehow separate. It's always been a really bizarre disconnect for me. I think it's changing, of course, not enough and not fast enough. And again, how do things like this get funded because of the way the structures work? You know, like this doesn't fit any of those paradigms. Yeah, but I think it really is about shifting away and like I call it from the singular to the plural. Like whenever we went to monoculture, monotheism, all that singular, that's jacked us up. From that point on, we've been a mess. We need options. We need plural. So that's the struggle that we're in. And I was talking to Joyce, like, you know, the largest living generation isn't the boomers anymore. It's now the millennials, it's Gen Y and folks younger. So like, we've got to start to shift into, and hopefully that shifts some of these conversations. So yeah, exactly. There's some things like, you know, I say to the students, it's a little uncouth, but like, you got to wait for certain people to just die off and just get out of the way. But because really, I mean, we need that shift. It's too long coming. It's, you know, and hopefully it's not too late. Like the point that you've made is like, have we wrecked the place so badly? Like we make this perfect little cold water stream and then there's no salmon.
Yeah, how do we pass out? I mean, we're just now learning some of the lessons that we should have been listening to the Chinook. You know, that we. And well, just in Seaside, they do something like 10 years ago, and then it's all forgotten. Like they did all this work for a national history park or national parks, you know, walking trails around the city and everything. And then 10 years later, they're trying to talk about the same thing. It's like you have to keep that historical. Just like when you guys moved to Oregon in the 80s, late 70s, you know, didn't learn about the internment, the Japanese internment in Indiana high school.
Right.
History. And
Right.
I worked with Allison Meada in VR
Hmm,
at Seaside, who was an intern when she was 17.
yeah,
And then when she went one night, and she went through the whole story, about how her family, he said they had a very successful story and everything. Came back, and here she was, almost retirement age, still working nights as a nurse, because her family had lost all of that.
Right.
Well, in all fairness, we didn't learn it in excellent Oregon either.
Well, that's true.
yeah, there you
That was
go.
good.
But it was like, but she described, she spent 6 months in the expo center with the,
Uh-huh.
where there wasn't even, there wasn't even rooms, it just had, was it 8x8 plywood things with no top on it.
I was gonna say that, you know, like I said, the weird stockyard, it just, when I saw it, I'm like, this is like a heard up thing. Like, what is this thing? And that's exactly what it was. Uh, No, I think, and my students say the same thing, is like education, like, how come I live in Portland and I didn't know anything about redlining and the destruction of an entire neighborhood and displacement? And that's the root of our homelessness problem. We hear about the homelessness, but like, we never heard about how we got here, like, we created it. And so I think so much of it, again, is stopping with that hollering, screaming, and accusing. Like, just start with some of the basics, like, education, understanding, perspective, using other metrics. Because, that singular voice worked for kind of one singular group and nobody else. And I think that that's what you're saying, like I want to say it's Buddhism. I've forgotten one of the religions, but they call it the reemergence of the goddess, meaning, once we went to monotheism and monoculture and everything, and like whereas, the goddess is coming back and bringing her chaos with her, kind of thing. And like, it's sort of like we're getting back to the plural. It was never singular. There was always a yin yang that, and like when we lost that balance, that's when we kind of have lost our way. And so, and that's kind of, I think it's Buddhism. I was speaking to like a religious scholar who was telling me these things, and he had like all of this artwork that was showing me, this is when the Buddha touches the ground and the earth does it. Like, what? But I mean, but it actually does make sense, like that we've lost all of those connections, and it's making us, like the way I describe it, like we're getting half the story and it's making us half crazy. Like, we just need the story. And by telling the story, shouldn't trigger people or set them off or think that I'm attacking you for something that your great great granddaddy may or may not have done. It's just the story. That's it. Don't put more onto it. It's just the flipping story. And then let everybody, then you take it from there. Okay. Again, it's in the past. They do nothing about that. Then you take it from there. And I think, to me, for so many people, it's just sort of settling. They're like, oh, it all makes sense now. But and it makes a map like this make sense. It makes a map like why are these people so broken for generations, and like what is happening here? Like what are some of the structural things going on? Just by knowing the story, it just helps. I think, and it helps with kind of that agitation and knee jerk, at least that I see. This is my strategy, and I do a lot of lecturing and education. But I think everyone comes into it in their own way. Yeah.